ได้ค่ะโอเคพร้อมค่ะ
เดี๋ยว
มาเข้าเครื่องนี้แท่งมาต่อไปก็มาอะไรอย่าง
Oh, I need a pen as well. Ah, that's how you do it. Two TVs, 2 screens.
ได้ส่งที่เอาผิดไม่ใช่ยังไม่มาเอาผิดเอาไฟล์ของทีเชอร์แก้วันที่ Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Time to go.
Oh, no one right now. Okay. 2.
Good night. Where are the people?
Mm-hmm. This one. Okay.
This is the live.
Mm-hmm. เฮ้ยลืมยังไม่ส่งเข้านั่นนี่หมายส่งเหลือเกินนั่นyeah that's okay you can say something to student yeah
Okay, hi everyone. Welcome back. It's time for additional English. Hope you are all well. So just wait for the numbers to go up and then we will start. Can you hear me okay? Can you comment? Who knows?
in English yeah
You can comment in English. Cool, alright then. So just to give you a little heads up about what we're doing today.
ไอ้ตัวนี้มันไม่ใช่
Basically, it's the final part of charts and graphs. So you're thinking, oh, not this again. But this is for help with the speaking activity. So we did talk about increase and decrease. But what format and how do you talk best about that? How can you fit everything together? So like an introduction and then talking about changes and then summarizing or giving the final message that you want to talk about for a particular graph. So that's what we're going to cover today. Alright, and we're going to look at a familiar slide which you know already, sorry, a familiar graph which you know already from the worksheet that we've done. So we'll use this as an example that you can easily relate to. Okay, so this one we know already. But what does it show? What does the graph show us? So this just tells us about changes, right? It's showing us the changes in the different things. We've got two sets of data, and it's telling us about the changes of the green and the changes that happen to the blue. So this blue and green, then, what data is that? Changes in what? Well, it's foreign workers, right? So it's data, changes in data for foreign workers. And then what types are there? Well, there are two types. We can see that there are two types given by this. So they are temporary, which means just a short time, and also permanent. Permanent means like for a longer time, and maybe for life, remember. So we've got two different types of workers, and we're looking at how that changes. Okay, so when does this change? Over what period are we talking about? Period is like a duration of time. And later we'll be using words to describe that, so like during, until. Okay, so just a period of time which we can help to simplify the explanation of the graph. Okay, so when is this happening? Well, it's from this time, 1992, until 2001. And how long is that period? That's a period of 10 years, right? 10 years, so we're looking at a decade. All right, cool. So the graph shows change. So what changes are there? We need to just open up with a kind of introduction. So intro, what does the graph show? So something like the graph shows what? It shows changes, right? It shows the change. And what is the change in? It's two types of data. So it shows us the change in the number of, and the two types of workers. The number of, first of all, permanent, and temporary foreign workers. And then we wanted to know about time as well. So remember we said a 10-year period. So for a 10-year period from what specific date? What is the time that we're actually looking at? From then, 1992 until 2001. Okay, so that's a good little intro or introduction to the graph and how we're going to talk about it. Okay, so there we go. The graph shows that. Also remember, you can use different words for this. So we could use show, we could use present, we could use illustrate, and we could use indicate. These are all different ways of saying show. So it's important to know your synonyms, right? It's it makes it more interesting or less, there'll be less repeating, less repetitious. So how can you find these? Well, synonyms you can find at a good place. This is where I go for all of mine. This is thesaurus.com. So go there, type in your word, and then you'll get lots of different words with the same meaning. So like equivalent words or similar meanings for that one word that you're trying to find a different word for. So there we go. Right, so we've done the intro. All right then, so what's next? Well, there are two sections, right? You've got two sets of data, and they start differently. You've got the dark blue, dark green. So the green changes a lot from. So from here, the green changes quite a lot. So we've got this kind of movement going down, all the way down to there, and goes to there. And then we've got the blue, which pretty much stays the same for that same time. Okay, so it remains unchanged, it stays the same. So those are the two sections. We've got the green, which goes down and then up, and then we've got the blue, sorry, it goes up again. And we've got the blue, which stays the same and then also goes up. So this part is different, and this part is similar, right? Because they are both going up in the second part of the graph. So we've got these two dates then. We've got from 1992 until we can sort of do it to this section, 1997. So we'll do it from here to here. And then the last part is from here to here. Alright, so we can group these together. Alright, as a reminder then, this was from the last time. As a reminder from the last time, words you can use for the rate of change. So is it slow, like this one, slowly and slightly, then a little bit faster, and then more faster, and then faster still. So we have words you can use for slowly and quickly, and then all of the ones in between. So slowly, quickly, and in between. Alright, so now we can talk about the increase and decrease. But at some point you need to compare or contrast to show what's happening. So really it depends on the graph. But you shouldn't compare each and every data point from year to another year to the other year to the other year. So that is actually a bad way of comparing the graph. So there's a little bit of a warning. So here we're looking at from this year, then we're looking at the next year, and then we're going on to the next year. So in 1992, green was 40,000 and blue was 15,000. Then green plunged to 22,000, but blue stayed the same in 1993. In 1994, green plunged again. So you can see this is kind of confusing or a complicated way of saying it. So we need to write it in a more simple way. Alright, so how can we make it easier? Well, for this graph, we can make it easier by splitting it into two parts, like I showed you a little bit before. So we'll probably do this. We'll do something like this. these can be the two parts. So going from 1992 to 1997, and then from 1997 to 2001. So these are the two parts of the graph which we can compare the changes in the foreign workers. Alright, so let's have a look at green first then. So we have this big drop. And then how are we going to describe that? So we could write something like from 1992 to 1994. What changes? Well, we're talking about this one. The number of permanent workers. And how can we describe this and this decrease? Well, it's quite a sharp decrease, isn't it? So we can say fell sharply. Okay, so it fell sharply. Now, where did it fall from? So it came from this one down to about here. So it fell sharply from 40,000 to 12,000. So that describes that bit. Then we can see that the graph goes up again. Then it risen. So then it rose again. And then after that, what happened? You can see that it goes flat. So we describe that part of it. Then it, hopefully you can remember this, level off. Then it leveled off at, and then what value? It's this value. So we can say at 20,000, okay? Great, okay, so we've described the first part, the first period, the first part of the section we were going to talk about, and that was for green, the permanent settlers. Now we'll go on and talk about the next. I forgot to do about this bit, so this bit remains unchanged, obviously. Right, so that's done. Okay, so now we're going to talk about from 1992, we're talking about the same period, until this period. Sorry, from this year until this year, so this one period, 1992 to 1997, for the blue, which is for the temporary workers. Okay, so we can see that it stays the same. Stays the same all the way along. Slight difference here, but about the same. So roughly the same or approximately the same. There's no difference, really. Then we can see that there is a dramatic increase in 1 year to 1997, and then if we were to continue talking, a steady upward trend, kind of steady upward trend going this way. Okay. So, as we've already talked about this period, for the green, we'll say same for the blue. So during the same period, continuing on from what we wrote before, during the same period, the number of, and then what are we talking about? We're talking about temporary workers. So the number of temporary workers, keep on spelling that wrong. Number of temporary workers. So you can say this part, you can say remains the same or remains unchanged, stays the same, stays. Stayed the same, and don't forget to say at what level or what number they stayed the same at. So they stayed the same at 15,000. Then we want to describe this part, but increased. How did it increase? Well, this is very quickly, it's a very sharp increase. So we can choose a vocabulary, choose an adverb. So dramatically, considerably, significantly, some word that tells us that it was a big increase in a short time. So it increased dramatically. And then to what value? Looking at this value, to, let's say, just over 30,000. And then don't forget to tell us the end point, so the time we're looking at, which is 1997. Okay, so you should have something like that. Because my handwriting's so bad, I had to type it out for you. Don't forget though, for increase dramatically, you can use other words. Again, go to thesaurus.com, find a synonym. So you could have soar, something like that. So that would mean the same thing as going up very quickly. Or you could have rocket. Okay. Some word that has a similar meaning to a dramatic increase. Okay, so we've got to this part. Now we're going to describe this part. So, give the times again. So for 1997, from 1997 onwards. And how can you describe this? Well, let's have a different way of saying it. Let's use there was, there was. Okay, there was what? There was an increase. What kind of increase? Well, it's quite steady, right? It's going steady. So there was a steady increase. In blue, we just said a steady increase in blue. You know what blue is, it's the number of temporary workers. And then we'll talk about the end point here until it arrived at. The word we use for that is reach, until it reached a peak. You could say peak, but really we don't know what happens after the graph. So actually this is a maximum for our graph. So you could say something like until it reached a maximum of, and then what is the value. So we can see it is this, but it's just over, or just over. Or you could say about. $40,000, $45,000. And then don't forget to give the date of the endpoint, so that is 2001. Okie dokie. So, if you couldn't read my handwriting, which is possibly true, then there is the text. Okay, so let's have a look at the other data then. The green part, the permanent workers, continuing on from 1997. So you can see that this is very similar to the one in blue, the temporary workers, and how can we describe that? So we know that goes, the blue one was roughly like somewhere here. And you can see that that was similar. So we use similarly. After 1997, there was a what. So now we're describing this. What was there? How can you describe that? Have a little think. Well, how does it go up? Is it slow? Is it fast? Is it somewhere in between? It's kind of slow, but a little bit faster than slow. So we can say steady. And then another word for increase might be rise. In what? There was a steady rise in green, and green is the number of permanent workers or number of permanent settlers. And then so we're moving along here, it's increasing, steadily increasing, until it reached what? So we're looking again at the value. So what value do we have? So what did it reach? It reached about 35,000. Okay. Right, so that's done. So now we're going to summarize. We've done the introduction and then we've described the increase and decrease. And now we just need to finish it off and say like an overall summary of how it changed. So, you know, what is the important or what is the biggest difference between these two types, between the green and the blue? At the start, blue is lower than the green, right? But at the end, it is higher. So you might want to talk about that. Alternatively, you could talk about green, so doing it the other way around. Green is higher than blue, but it's lower than blue at the end, right? At the start, it is high, at the end, it is lower. And then blue is lower at the start but higher at the end. Alright, so how can we say that? Throw in one of these, a nice transition word. So although blue, the number of temporary workers, although blue was lower than green, so swap these out for the actual meaning of green. Green is the permanent number of, the number of permanent workers. And then what are we talking about? So generally we're talking about at the beginning of the period that this graph shows. So although green was lower than, although blue was lower than green at the beginning, they, not it, so we're talking about numbers, they were significantly higher. They were higher at the end. Okay, so is it a big difference? Well, yes, there's quite a big difference, right? We're talking about this difference. So how much is that? Well, if we look over to this section, you can see that that's about 10,000, right? The difference between 45 and 35. So is that a lot or is that a little? It's quite a lot. All right, what's a word that you can use to describe quite a lot? Or a big change, a change by a big amount, so it doesn't have to be a lot. So a big amount, what's the word that you can use for that? Well, you can use something like significant, considerable, or you could have noticeable, from the worksheet, markedly. Okay, so then you need to know, let's give this value by, don't forget that by means the difference, so by 10,000. And then you can talk about the final finishing value, so what did it finish at? Okay, so putting that all together and then writing it down, I suppose, is the best thing before you start talking about it. You can compare the general changes of the two different workers, the working types, and you can finish it by telling about the peak, what peak it was, and also what year it was. Alrighty, so that's pretty much it. So hopefully that can help you. I guess the best thing to do is write it down, or just take it very slowly, do it in chunks, so that you can easily talk about it. Okay, so tips to remember then. We were comparing amounts also there, so did something slightly different. So remember I talked about how you'd use much and more together. This is an example. You can also change much to significant, or significantly, or considerably. So you can use this to compare two amounts. Or if it's only a small difference, a small amount, then you can use something like slightly. You could also use, instead of more, you could also say higher or lower. Okay, so that's just comparing two amounts in 1 year, for example, from the graph. Okay, so here's an example just to make sure it's clear for you. How would you describe the difference between red and blue bars in this bar chart? So it's considerably higher. It's higher by how much? Well, the amount is a lot or very much. So then we'd use something like considerably to explain that. Okay, also you need to remember the two different ways of explaining how it changes. So if we're just looking at the green here, and we're talking about this part, then you can see that there was a steady increase. So we're using adjective and noun. This is a noun, right? So adjective, noun, and then what's the second way? The second way is to use verb and adverb. So verb, adverb. So remember, you can switch those two around and make it sound more interesting. Okay. All right, so this is for the speaking activity, which is a must-do. So what I'll do, I'll send you a graphs on the group chat, and then you can start to explain, look at the graphs, start to write down your ideas. I'll also send some useful website links. Okay, to help you. And then look at the trends. So describe the trends and then compare important bits of the graph. So remember, we have an intro, then you talked about increase and decrease, comparing, and then finally we made a bit of a summary at the end. Okay, so when you're doing it, take your time, like I said before. If you want to pause your recording device and then think about what you're going to say next and then restart, that's fine. Or you can just carry on right the way through. MP3 is okay. If you want to keep your work private, actually, I didn't think about this before, but if you don't want to share your work so that other people can listen, then you can go to Google Drive and then share a link. All right. If you don't know how to do that, then you can always create an account at SoundCloud. Okay, and then that's easy enough to share the link with me that way. I will give you my email as well, so you can send that. All right, so that's it. If you have any questions, I guess just ask on the main group. But otherwise, I look forward to listening to some of your speaking activities. Okay then, that's good. So, bye-bye for now. See you again tomorrow. สวัสดีครับทุกคน Bye bye.